Turning back to a CO2 storage site that we have discussed earlier today, Northern Lights. When they first announced their plans, they were approached by companies who wanted to store 10 times more CO2 than their capacity. That clearly shows the need and importance of developing storage locations. So there are high expectations about the success of Northern Lights, and we're happy to have senior geoscientists with us today to tell us about the experiences and learnings from their own CO2 storage journey. Please welcome Catalina Acuna to the stage.
Right. Let's start with some key messages, which is a nice way to give you the outline of my presentation. The Northern Lights, as you know, is a leading CO2 transport and storage company. The experience that we have in the storage maturation of CO2 resources can be an example for others to follow or maybe to learn from. The evaluation and screening of the subsurface for the purpose of CO2 storage differs quite dramatically sometimes from the evaluation done when looking for oil and gas resources. The storage resources maturation process does not necessarily follow the same process that the oil and gas resources maturation does. CO2 storage resources is not the same as storage capacity in the subsurface realm. CO2 storage business models could have a great impact on the timing of the storage resources maturation process. Therefore, understanding the subsurface risks and the opportunities throughout the whole maturation process is crucial. As you've seen this before, the Northern Lights is a CO2 transport, permanent storage, but also temporary storage service company. I'm going to talk about the permanent storage, also called as the geological storage. When I was doing this presentation, I wanted to see if Belluna had any position on storage. And they do. And they have this very interesting reading. It's called Scaling the CO2 Storage Industry, a Study and a Tool. And their key message is that the availability of CO2 storage is the linchpin of CCS deployment. A lack of storage capacity could render CO2 capture futile. And I couldn't agree more with that. There are other key messages that they have, that, for instance, that we have to do very heavy investments if we want to come up with all the storage capacity that is going to be needed for the future CCS projects. Also, that the scale of CO2 storage industry is going to be so large that maybe we're going to be in competition for resources, for the oil and gas and the CCS. This is good news for us in the subsurface. Another important point is understanding that the injectivity capacity is as important as the storage capacity. So if we're going to talk about storage resources, let's go through some basic concepts. What is a storage resource? It's the quantity of CO2 that can be stored in a geological formation, as simple as that. What is a storage site? It's the site that comprises the storage facility, the storage well, and the storage complex. And what is the storage complex? And this is my realm. It's the subsurface geological system, which extends vertically to comprises the storage units and the seals, but also extends laterally to the defined limits of the CO2 storage project. There are quite a few geological storage options, and you've heard many of them. The most important ones are, or the most common ones, are the depleted oil and gas reservoirs, number one, the use of CO2 as an enhanced oil and gas recovery, which is number two, and the deep saline formations, which could be offshore or onshore. In the Northern Lights, we only have one storage site to date, and the storage facility for that site is located in Øygarden, and that includes the pipeline. The storage well is called EOS, and the storage complex is a deep saline formation offshore, which is called Aurora. Aurora is 100 kilometers offshore, is 2,600 meters deep. It's an open saline aquifer on the flanks of the Troll Field structure, far away from Troll Field. The storage units, which is what we used to call the reservoirs in the oil and gas industry, are shallow marine Jurassic sands, and they're called the Johansen Formation and the Cook Formation. The primary seal is a very thick shale, deep marine shale, called the Drake Formation, and we also have a secondary seal, which is the base of the Cretaceous unconformity, which is the cap rock of the Troll Field, so we know it works. The Aurora storage capacity as of today is 37.5 million tons, which is also the injection capacity, and this will be achieved with an injection rate of 1.5 million tons per year for 25 years. We are in the process of finding more storage for the next phases of the project. But before we had Aurora, we had to go through a process of screening storage. So how do you screen for storage? We follow the core activities of the CO2 storage assessment in subsurface. First, we go to storage resources and scalability, which is basically how much we can store safely, and that will help us to build commercial commitments. Then we analyze all the risks, and then we mitigate, or we make a plan to mitigate all those risks, which is arguably the most important part of these core activities. If you want a storage site that is the least uncertain, then you need to choose one that has the most data. Decommissioned fields would be your favorite one, although they could have possible issues with legacy wells. There are also risks associated with the fact that you don't know how the end of field life left the reservoir and the structure conditions. If you want a storage that has scalability, you want it to grow with your business, then saline aquifers are the best. However, nobody goes and tries to find water, so we don't have data, and investments are required. On the corner here, I can show you what would be an ideal storage site. It's the one that has the most data, the most scalability, and the least maturation time. There is no ideal storage, so you need a portfolio of storage. And to evaluate those storages, you also need to see, okay, what are the key factors in the storage resources? Are they the same as the oil and gas storage resources? Well, they are and they're not. So the similarities are that the subsurface is the same, that's good news. Also, the competences that you need and the data that you need to evaluate the subsurface are the same. In both business, you require to de-risk three of the more, or at least four important factors. However, there are quite a few similarities as well. It's very important to know that in the CCS business, subsurface is actually downstream. We don't initiate the business anymore. The storage resources don't initiate the business. What initiates the business is the customers. There is a much lower economic margin, as it was mentioned before. Therefore, no extensive exploration campaigns are allowed. There is no fixed price tag. We don't need a closed structure. That's why we can have an open aquifer. Possibly, you don't have data, and therefore, you may not have a proof of the full site. No, you don't know if it's going to be completely integral, or if you're going to have injectivity, or you don't know your actual resource size. There is much lower tolerance for the seal uncertainty than in oil and gas exploration, so geomechanical studies are a must. So what would be the ideal process of screening for storage resources? Well, ideally, you would go through your continental shelf and look for abandoned and depleted fields and saline aquifers. You would rank them for the factors that I've mentioned. You would have your top candidates. In the end, you would do some further assessment, and you would choose your final site. If your final site is a saline aquifer, you might need an exploration well. If it's a dry closure, you might need an appraisal well. In all cases, you need further studies. But what is the real life process? And in the real life is Northern Lights for us. In this real life process of maturation for storage resources, we started in 2017 when Equinor, Shell, Total signed a partnership to agree to mature a CO2 storage on behalf of Gasnova. There were quite a few different potential storages evaluated, some dry closures, some depleted oil and gas fields, and they all had to satisfy some boundary conditions, like they needed to storage 40 million tons at a rate of 1.5 million tons per year in one well for 25 years. After we did a thorough evaluation, we came up with the conclusion that none of them fulfilled the boundary conditions and that the subsurface risks were too high for that. Therefore, we had to move to another area. But we are moving to another area when the project is at the concept select phase. So the plan for facilities has started. And what happens is that in subsurface, we are at DG0, DG1. We had to evaluate the area, which was Aurora, in a very thorough way, in a very short amount of time. Because it was a saline aquifer, we needed to have an exploration well that confirmed the presence of injectable and monitorable sands, favorable pressure regime, and cap rock presence and sealing capacity. The well, EOS, confirmed all those factors, and we had a project. We had storage. But the storage maturation process hasn't stopped there. So what is a storage maturation process? As per the SPE, which is the Society of Petroleum Engineers, and their storage resources maturation system, storage maturation is nothing but a consistent approach to estimate the storable CO2 quantities, while describing them in terms of availability and certainty. The more certain you are, the more mature your resources are. This table is a classification of resources, the storage resources, and is almost a carbon copy of the oil resources. So the less mature are here when you don't have a discovery yet or a well, and then you continue maturing them, analyzing, studying until you have capacity. This is the storage capacity for subsurface, is quantities of resources, storage resources that are anticipated to be commercially accessible in the characterized geological formation. Before that, you're not supposed to talk about capacity. So if this was taken from the oil and gas industry, does it mean that both businesses are compared in terms of process maturation? Well, not really. Depends on your business, depends on what is the model that you're going to choose. And that's why we call it is beyond maturation. If you're going to choose a model where you're going to drill and sell, meaning you're going to have all your storage first, and then you're going to proceed to sell them, your contracts will guarantee storage capacity. The project will have a clear portfolio, and that's what it will offer. However, you need a lot of time upfront and a lot of resources, human and financial, to be able to have this portfolio. If you do the other type of business model, and this is our chicken and egg conundrum, you sell your capacity first, and then you go and look for it, then what happens is that you are going to have expected future revenues that could pay for all those resources and timing, as well as capex for wells and facilities. Well, the problem is that in that case, you're going to have some sort of portfolio of storage resources, but they are not all going to be at the same maturity level, which means that you have to understand all the risks and uncertainties of the subsurface when you communicate your maturity of the resources. And mitigations need to be in place. It's not just about maturing storage resources, it's also about when we do it and how do we communicate the level of maturation. Depending on how mature are the storage resources, the subsurface risks are different. So how do we mitigate? Well, the good news is that we can mitigate. Of course, there are mitigations. The risk, the main risk, is that the geological formation will not achieve a commercial storage. That's the big problem. But there are mitigations for that. The only problem is that they are expensive. They require either more capex or more time and human resources allocated. So on the right-hand side, I have the all the risks associated with least mature resources, which are the ones when you don't have well or discovery. On the left-hand side, I have the less mature resources when more studies are required. Orange means showstoppers. You have one of these risks, and you have to stop the maturation of that resource and move on. Yellow means the layers. So for instance, if you have the risk of monitorability is not feasible, you cannot go on with that site, then you have to go to another area and probably have another well. When you have evidence of compartmentalization or injection rates not achieved, then you have to reevaluate the project's scalability, and maybe some commercial promises are not going to be fulfilled. So, key messages, again, and I hope I have delivered them. Northern Lights has experience with the storage resources maturation, and we hope that others can follow them or learn from them. The evaluation of and screening of the subsurface for the purpose of CO2 storage is different from the evaluation that you do for oil and gas resources. The CO2 storage resources maturation process doesn't necessarily follow the same process that the oil and gas industry does. And storage resources in terms of subsurface is not the same as storage capacity. The CO2 storage business model that your company or service may choose could have a critical impact on the timing of the storage resources maturation process, and for which you really need to understand the subsurface risks and opportunities throughout the whole resource maturation process. And with that, I'd like to finish, and if there is time for questions, that would be great. If not, thank you.
If there are any questions from the audience, you feel free to use the microphone. I haven't gotten any online, so I think I'll say thank you very much for
You're very welcome.
A little insight into all the different aspects you need to take into account. Thank you so much, Catalina.
Thank you.
Now,